All right, I feel like if I'm gonna be drinking this all the time, I need to know more about it. I mean, whiskey.
I mean, if only there was a magical wizard's tower with a vice chancellor who was willing to teach us, and it was right behind us.
I'm intimidated.
'Cause I'm a modern rogue!
Defining whisk.
I feel like we should have swords and like walking up
Really
with
does,
determination.
I'm pointing over here.
It's this one, right?
Yep. Nicely done, sir. Holy cow, Jason. I am unbelievably excited about this. We have Daniel Whittington,
Sir.
the Vice Chancellor and co-founder of the Whiskey Marketing School at Wizard Academy. Thank you so much for joining us, man.
It is my pleasure.
I may cry.
It's okay. We have Irish whiskey for that.
Am I understanding this correctly? You guys are the very first and currently the only whiskey sommelier program in the world.
Officially, yes.
Wow! And you get sweet-ass medallions.
Yeah, from Flavor Flav.
How many wishes do you get when you rub that?
I haven't capped out yet.
Does it deflect
So
bullets?
no one knows.
So what do you learn in the whiskey marketing program?
Well, the priority is to help contribute to the community of whiskey drinkers and anti-snobbery and innovation, and then also to teach people how to talk, market, and present and tell stories about whiskey in a way that makes them a lot more money.
So you teach people how to be cool drinking whiskey and tell rad stories.
That's right, and make more money from it, most importantly.
Right on.
Because otherwise, we're just drinking whiskey.
So we're in the Whiskey Vault, a hidden room inside a library, inside of a wizard's tower filled with amazing whiskeys.
Yes,
We passed all of the trials. We have slain the Hydra, and now we will take his booze.
Wait a minute.
Where do we begin? Walk me through the basics of whiskey.
So let's just talk about what whiskey is first, but we're not going to do that with empty glass because that's just wildly inappropriate.
I like your style.
We're going to try a few things. So I'm pouring you small amounts of whiskey because otherwise we won't make it to the end of the video. All right, Redbreast 12 Irish single malt whiskey. Cheers to you, gentlemen, or as they say, sláinte.
Sláinte.
Cilantro.
Okay, I'll explain to you later what you're drinking, but let's just talk whiskey first. So whiskey is a generic categorical term like vehicle. So a Hummer is a vehicle.
Right.
So is a Prius. So whiskey just means grain alcohol aged. How you age it depends on the country, how long you age it and requirements.
And what
depends on the
grain
country.
is negotiable
what
as well?
grain changes the name. So
Okay.
the name is going to change where it's based on where it's from or based on what it's being made out of. The name will change. So first, let's say American whiskey, and by the way, the E and not E, it has to do with the country of origin. So Scotland was no E. And whiskey just comes from the term Uisce Beatha, which just means water of life in Gaelic, right? And so it was shortened to Uisce and then whiskey, and it was no E.
That's appropriate.
It is appropriate.
I like that.
And then the Irish, in order to distinguish their product on the market,
That's us.
added an E.
I forgot that's us. I found out I'm Irish recently.
We just added vowel?
Well, you're surrounding an English Scotsman right here. We don't go to outright warfare.
We're gonna end in combat.
That's right. E just was added as a marketing differentiator.
That's it?
That's all it is. And so if the country making the whiskey has its origin in Irish whiskey, then they'll add an E. American whiskey adds an E. If it's based in Scottish whiskey, then it's not. Japan, no E.
So when you say grain alcohol, is there a particular type of grain? Is it always...
Any type of grain. Now, traditionally, almost all whiskey is made from 4 grains, right? The majority of, there's the one-offs doing weird things, but the majority of whiskey is either corn, barley, rye, or wheat, or any combination of those 4. Now, if it's malt whiskey, it almost always means all barley. Now, in America, there's no legal requirement to have all barley in a malt whiskey, but it very often does mean it's all barley. In Scotland, if it's a malt, it has to be all barley. Grain whiskey, traditionally in the UK, just means a mix of grains.
Okay.
Not a grain.
Help me out here, because what little I know about this is that when you get alcohol out of that, you're creating ethanol basically. That's moonshine? How does it become?
It's only called moonshine in America.
Okay. It's just
Yeah.
clear alcohol,
It's just a
right?
clear spirit, looks like vodka. We've got some examples of it back here, just totally clear. It's only when you age it in wood that it gets all the color. And now different countries have rules on whether you can add things, fake coloring or not.
And what type of wood you can use and so forth.
See, that seems remarkable to me, that the flavor and the color of this is just from the wood. It doesn't seem like
Now,
wood.
Scotland will allow a little bit of caramel coloring.
Who's the most stringent about it?
American will. Ironically, America has more strict rules than just about anybody.
Really?
Yeah. Not on what you can make, but on what you can call it once you've made it based on how you made it.
And that's enforceable by law,
Yeah.
right? For a while, and this has probably happened with a variety of whiskeys, things were calling themselves Scotch, even though they weren't made in Scotland.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
that's
no,
all
let-
pre-prohibition.
yeah, let's talk about the words here, because you got Scotch. I know bourbon is a
Yeah,
thing.
let's hit this.
I know. Yeah.
So real quick, the way that you describe, remember, it was vehicle, whiskey, just means whiskey.
Whiskey,
right?
yeah, got it.
So how you call it, it either has to do with where it's from.
Yep.
So Scotch can't be called Scotch unless it's from Scotland, or it has to do with the grain recipe. Now, distillers will call this a mash bill. A mash bill is a definition of the recipe you use of your proportions of grain. 5% malted barley, 60% corn, and 20% rye, so on. So if you have a bourbon, legally it is at least 51% corn.
Okay.
Oh.
If it's under 51% corn, it can't be called bourbon.
So
If it's rye.
if I'm sorting out all the secret code words, Scotch equals from Scotland, bourbon equals 51% plus
And
corn.
American.
Okay, and American. Bourbons are only American.
Now,
Got it.
now they are.
What's
Not
up?
Kentucky. You can make a bourbon anywhere in the United States, although most people from Kentucky will argue that with you. Not true. That's
about-
the law, though.
What about rye?
Rye means 51% rye. That's it. So let's try a bourbon. I'm drinking slower than you guys. So maybe we should do a different one. This one's 100 proof. We'll do one of my favorite classic bourbons that's totally affordable and, in my opinion, way underpriced.
Okay.
Way underpriced.
Henry McKenna?
This is a 10-year-old Henry McKenna, bottled in bond. I'm not going to go into what that means, but that means that this is at least 51% corn, and it's aged by law in new charred oak barrels.
Here's what little I know. You could buy old barrels that were used to ferment sherry or something, or
Any
whatever.
wines.
Right,
Yeah,
wines.
absolutely.
And then that will color the flavor in a certain way. But these are brand new barrels. What kind of barrels?
American oak.
Oak. Okay, great. So this will taste vaguely oaky, I guess?
Yes. Cheers to you. Ah, yeah. That's just a good bourbon right there. Just a
Yeah.
good, simple.
Did you notice the
No
difference?
frills.
Yeah, I definitely detected the higher alcohol content.
Now,
It's got a
Irish
little more
whiskey
bite.
traditionally, which we started with. Now remember, it's single malt, so that means it's all barley.
Single malt means one single, not a blend of grains, but one
Yes.
type of grain.
That's how nerdy we're going to get right now.
Great. Okay, good.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna draw a little sketch that this is a sort of a device I use to understand the 5 kinds of Scottish whiskey, and it also defines a lot of other whiskey terms at the same time.
Okay.
So in Scotland, you've got 5 different kinds of labels that could be on a bottle. You also have 5 regions of whiskey in Scotland. That's a different thing. So we're just gonna talk about the kinds of Scottish whiskey, right? Now I break it down into mom, dad, and the 3 kids. So we're gonna say dad, mom, and the 3 children. Now, dad, we're going to call single malt.
And that is one type of grain distilled and then aged in a barrel.
That's right. Now, in Scotland, it has to be a used barrel, not a new barrel. Now, this is an important thing, and I'm going to do this right here. Single grain, single is not a descriptor of grain. Single malt, single is not an adjective describing malt. They're 2 words talking about 2 different things.
Oh,
Single simply means one distillery.
okay.
Right? Malt and grain refer to the recipe of grains used to make the whiskey. If it says malt in Scotland, it's all barley. If it says grain, it's a mixture of grains, which is closer to an Irish whiskey or an American whiskey, actually.
And the single, so I guess I am now learning that you will take alcohols from multiple distilleries and blend them together.
Yes.
That's what blended Scotch is. Hey, I can be taught.
That was fun watching that realization.
All right, so if you understand that, single grain doesn't mean one grain.
Right.
It means one distillery grain whiskey. So all we do if we add multiple distilleries is now there's only 3 other products.
Yep.
So here's 2 kinds of categories. You got a single malt and a single grain. If you have a whiskey that's made up of 2 dads for equal opportunity, then you have now a blended malt, right? The only thing that changed was single and blended. If you have 2 moms, you have a blended grain.
And grain is code for multiple different grains.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
If you have 1 mom and 1 dad, you're now a blended Scotch also known as the cheapest category of Scottish whiskey.
That's
Because
anything goes.
You can basically get it from anywhere you want.
Now hold on, but it has the word Scotch, which
It's
means
still made in Scotland.
It has to. Okay,
and it's still at least 3 years old in used oak. So that's all you need to know. Now, the terms that we just learned, single and grain and malt, those all apply to a lot of other countries as well, but they're just not as heavily enforced. Like, for example, America can have a malt whiskey, like Balcones and Waco, and they can do a single malt. Well, they can't call it single malt Scotch. It's not from Scotland.
Right.
And legally, it's not even required to be 100% barley to be called a single malt. They could have corn in there. They get some wheat to flavor it up, right? But mostly when you find a single malt, it's them doing a Scottish style whiskey in America.
Okay.
Most of the time. What we just tried now, Ireland, and this is why I described this. Ireland has a very traditional way of making whiskey. That's a single pot still and single malts. And then the blended grains came later in history. But one of the things that is a trademark Irish whiskey flavor, which I think is awesome, is a percentage of unmalted barley. And that results in a very unique flavor. Shows up, I've only ever experienced it in Irish whiskey. And historically, it was their way to cheat the English tax system. So the English tried to tax them out of existence the same way they did everybody. And they started taxing malted barley. And so the Irish said, well, screw you. We're going to start using unmalted barley percentages to cut down on the tax liability and make the same amount of whiskey.
Okay, unmalted barley means.
Now, malted means that you have gone through the process that lets the grain trick it into growing and breaks down the starches. It gets super nerdy.
Okay.
Right? Unmalted just means you took it straight from the plant and you haven't done anything but grind it up.
Right off the vine, so to
Yeah,
speak.
if you malt it, it's a process of tricking it into growing and cracks its shell
Wait,
and
so-
all this stuff.
So the Irish just added some unprocessed original pieces.
That's all it was. Now it results in a really amazing flavor that you got to try in Redbreast. But let's talk about rye.
All right. Yeah. Wow. Lot to.
I know,
process.
we're rocking it
I'm
here.
getting the words.
As a matter of fact, let's talk about rye and then we'll finish with Scotch.
Okay.
Is that fair enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know what? We're going to go with Whistle Pig. So Whistle Pig is made in Vermont. There was a lot of uproar originally because they were sourcing their whiskey from Canada before they were old enough to have bottled and aged their own.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So that was their runway before they could.
That's right. Now this is very common in whiskey distilleries, which is you open today. Well,
Yeah.
what happens when you can't label a straight whiskey straight unless it's 4 years old? How's that for an outlay? It's like, hey, we opened. When can we have a bottle? 4 years.
Wow, I never even thought about that because you want to launch a brand, you start right away, and it's like you already know the flavor profile that you're going for, so
Yeah.
you
Yes.
just buy the right parts from other people.
Think
Or-
about how much money it costs you to start up a distillery.
Yeah.
Because most businesses fail within the first year. You've got to go.
You got $1
5
million
years.
outlay. Yeah, no big deal.
Before
So
you
there's
can
2 ways that distilleries solve that problem. The first is they make something else. Vodka, gin, rum, something that they can
Something
age
that doesn't have to be
sell faster.
aged.
Okay.
Right? So now you're bringing in capital while you sit on your whiskey. The other way is...
That's an old Irish invective.
That's right.
Sit on your whiskey.
That's right. Hey, you, it's like go fly a kite.
Yeah.
Go sit on your whiskey. So the other option is you buy already aged whiskey from bulk producers or other distilleries. You age them a little bit longer, but not 4 years.
Yeah.
Or you finish them in a different barrel than they would have originally done it, and then you bottle it and sell it immediately. Now, there's a company called MGP, and this is gonna start a lot of fights. Sorry about this.
No, ready.
There's a company called MGP that's responsible for about half the bourbon brands on the shelf in the store at any given time.
They're like the Budweiser.
They're a massive bulk facility. They're amazing. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're creating great whiskey. That's what's gonna start fights.
Oh, everyone
Because
wants to believe.
Whiskey snobs will argue to the death that MGP is a hellhole of non-creativity.
Like, is there something on the label you would look for?
That's another thing that'll start a fight in the comments. So legally, they're not required to say we got ours at MGP, but they do have to say where it was distilled. And MGP is located in Indiana, so you'll see a thing on the back of the bottle that says distilled in Indiana, in the heartland of America, or something like that, right?
It's code.
And what that means is, oh, it's an MGP whiskey.
But they're all still different.
They're all still different.
Okay.
The cool thing about MGP is, now here's how I argue with those people. If you go out to dinner at, say, Sullivan's in downtown Austin, you order a steak, are you disappointed that you didn't raise and kill and then butcher that steak yourself?
No.
Are you disappointed that Sullivan's didn't do it?
Yeah, no.
It's like, hey, Sullivan's, this steak is not legitimate.
Yeah.
Because you didn't raise it, kill it, and butcher it for me first.
I want to see the chef come out with a giant scimitar.
blood all up his hands.
Like,
How's your steak?
It's fresh. He put up a noble fight. It was a good death. I lost 2 line cooks.
Wielding a rapier.
Exactly. Do you need more mashed potatoes?
That's right.
All right.
Yeah, so wait,
Whistle
so
pig.
while we drink this is rye whiskey, which means it's at least 51% rye.
Got it.
This is now Whistle Pig is doing everything in one location, growing the grain, harvesting the grain, making the whiskey, aging it in barrels they've
And the
made.
benefit of all of that is that you get a more consistent product and that your brand is stronger because
And
everyone
it's
knows
local.
exactly what to
And you
expect.
appeal to purists.
And you get
Yes.
featured on Portlandia.
Hey,
No, maybe. Notice the kind of
this
black
is
pepper
so much,
spicy
yeah,
notes.
it's so smooth. This one doesn't have the kick or the bite of that last one that we did.
Yeah, it's a little sweeter. A lot of bourbons will use a higher percentage of rye grain to mellow out the corn.
Okay.
Right, so you get a high rye bourbon. And all high rye means is the next most grain was rye.
It's funny because the second one was a lot more smooth than the first one.
Oh, I disagree. That first, that 100 proof one was the second one. That one.
Making it was a little punchy. I think the Irish was smoother.
Really?
But this is my favorite thing about whiskey. Is it's so subjective that you can have completely different opinions and everyone is absolutely right.
And this one is definitely sweeter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Whistle Pig.
That's smooth. Smooth.
Okay, this we're gonna end with and call it a day.
Okay.
Fair enough?
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Wait. Hold on.
This is a way for you to understand it. Were you listening?
I was.
This is a blended malt scotch called Monkey Shoulder.
Okay, so
What does that
mean? Blended means it came from multiple distilleries. So you bought a bunch of alcohol and got a mix that tasted the way they wanted it to taste.
Malt means it was barley.
Yep. And Scotch means this comes from Scotland, right? Now wait a minute.
And you know it's at least 3 years old.
Oh, and sure enough, whiskey is spelled without an E because
That's
it came
right.
from Scotland. Okay, good. Boy, man, Scotch whiskey with an E, like that just screams counterfeit now. Now I know.
Have you seen one?
No.
You have really rude friends. I got you this amazing present, Ryan. It's Scotch whiskey, Scotch spelled with an X.
Hey, man, come on. Let's. Some of us are on a limited budget.
All right. So
Just enjoy blended malt scotch, sort of a butterscotch finish, light smoke, and let's be friends.
what's the thing you said? Sriracha?
Cilantro?
Cilantro?
You animal!
You're not Irish.
He just found out.
I did.
Literally like
Literally
a couple of
last
months ago.
He's still a wee baby Irish. It's slancha.
Cilantro.
Cilantro.
And what does that mean?
It means basically health, to your health. Yes.
Slancha!
Slancha.
To your health, dummy.